What is up, guys? I'm your friendly neighborhood web war fanatic, and this will be my review of the new Trickster Takeover scenario pack that recently came out for Marvel Champions. I'll be sharing my thoughts on both scenarios, the Enchantress and the Loki God of Lies. I'll also put down timestamps so you guys can jump to the part of the video that you guys want to see. But basically, for both scenarios, I'll be going over, just really quickly how the scenario plays out. I'll be going over what I like about the scenario, what I don't like, and then my overall power rankings for how difficult the villain is, and also how fun I think that the villain is. So that will be just a few bullet points I'll go over for both scenarios. And I'll also be going over the new modular set, Trickster Magic, that also came in Trickster Takeover. This is a modular set that is recommended for both the Enchantress and the Loki God of Lies scenario. And I'll also be comparing Loki God of Lies, this new Loki scenario, with the old Loki scenario from the Mad Titan Shadow, and just going over my thoughts between the two, which one's more difficult and which one I like more, basically. And before we begin, I do want to clarify this is just my subjective opinion, just my personal thoughts on these two villains here. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into it here with the first scenario, which is the Enchantress here. So Enchantress plays pretty straightforward. She's pretty much your regular Marvel Champion type of villain, which is, entirely fine, right? So all you got to do to defeat her is to bring her hit points down to 0 here, right? So if you're doing standard, you have her stage 1 and stage 2. Just bring her hit points down to 0 on both stages, and then you win the game. For expert mode, it's going to be the same thing, stage 2 and stage 3. Just bring her hit points down, and the players will win. A few unique things with her scenario is that she has 2 main scheme stages, right? So first one here is stage 1B with 6 per player threat, which is, quite low. And on her second main scheme here is going to be 9 per player threat. And if the stage 2B here hits that 9 per player threat threshold, then the players do lose a game. So that's how Enchantress threats out. That is a little bit of a lower threat threshold because she can easily pop this one with only 6 per player threat. And then the 9 one is more breathing room, but she has some ways to really add threat, which we'll go over a little bit later on in the video. The most unique thing about her is that she introduced a new mechanic in Marvel Champions called Force Actions here. So basically, every player, whenever you're playing the scenario, you'll begin the game with the part of the setup here with one of these attachments called the Hypnotic Gaze. And this is actually very thematic. So you have, there's 5 copies of different Hypnotic Gazes here, and you don't know which one you're going to get because you get one at random, and you're not allowed to flip it over and look at the flip side, right? If you do flip this one over here, right, and you look at the flip side of the card, it could be this, or it could be this, or this, or this. I think there's one more right here, the Trance of Wrath, right? And basically each one that you flip over, it'll give your identity the Enthrall trait. So before, it'll just have the Define trait, and then once it flips, you have the Enthrall trait. Enchantress has many ways to, flip this card over, and that's primarily going to be by adding charm counters on here. And if there's 5 or more counters, then you remove all of them and you flip over to your Enthrall trait here. And once Enchantress gets you flipped over to your Enthrall side over here, then you can no longer flip this card back over to the Define trait. So Enchantress has officially enthralled you, and all of her encounter cards get a little bit worse, a little bit more difficult once you are enthralled. So she really ramps up after that happens. And there's not really that many ways to entirely guarantee that you will never be enthralled. You can try to rush her down, but I think that even rushing her down, you will get enthralled. Every single game that I played, I've gotten enthralled against the Enchantress. I think that there is a very low chance of getting her over to defeating her, while staying fully defined on her. Because, if she's lucky and you have bad RNG, she can actually get you to the enthrall trait by turn 2 by adding a bunch of charm counters. But yeah, okay, so let's take a look at the Trance of Wrath here. So basically, it says when reviewed, search the top 5 cards in the counter deck for a card and reveal it. There's just a random effect. They all have something like that, right? When reviewed, you are stunned. Otherwise, place 2 threat on the main scheme. So each one of these cards has some sort of when reviewed effect, which is pretty negative. And then on here, there's also a Force Action. So that's a new mechanic in Marvel Champions. Exhaust this card. You take 1 indirect damage and then deal 2 damage to the minion. So all of these Force Actions here are pretty cool, and they give the player a lot of breathing room to think about how you want to do and how you want to maximize your decision making, right? So there's going to be a negative effect and also a positive effect for each one of these Force Actions here, right? So for the Trance of Wrath, for example, right, you exhaust it, you take an indirect damage, which is bad, but you can deal 2 damage to a minion, right? For the Trance of Sloth here, exhaust card, you heal a damage from the Enchantress, and you can draw a card and discard a card, so you kind of cycle through your deck a little bit faster and kind of see more options, but then you have to heal damage from the Enchantress, right? So each one of these has a good effect and a bad effect, and the way that Force Actions work in Marvel Champions is that it's an action that you have to take before the player phase ends, but you can choose when you want to take it, right? So if you're doing like, 2 players or 3 players, you can actually do that force action, out of turn during another player's turn because it's still an action that you can do out of turn, but it's forced, so you just have to do it before the entire player phase ends, right? So as long as someone still has their turn, you can still do the force action, even if your turn has already ended or before your turn began, you can still use that force action. So that's really cool because you can really decide when and where you want to do it to mitigate the bad effects and maximize on the good effects, for example the dealing 2 damage to a minion. So that's the main new gimmick here that the Enchantress has in her kit. And one thing to also keep in mind is that with both of her main schemes, they both have the exact same force interrupt, where it says here when a charm counter will be placed on the enchantment card in your play area, so like that hypnotic gaze card right here, it says if your identity has the enthralled trait, then you place a threat here on a threat on there instead, right? So basically what that means is whenever Enchantress adds a charm counter on your Hypnotic Gaze card, then you just add those counters as normally, but then whenever this gets 5 counters, you flip it over to the Enthralled trait. Now instead of adding counters to there, you can't because there's no counters, on the Enthralled side of the card, the Enchanted side, I mean. You instead just add threats on the main scheme. And that's actually pretty interesting with her abilities, right? Because the Enchantress, as a force response, after she attacks you, this is for all 3 stages here, you place a charm counter on the enchantment card in your play area. So now, every time she attacks you, instead of placing that counter, if you already are enthralled by her, then you add a threat to the main scheme. And that can really present some problems later on in the game after you're already enthralled, and then she gets just rapidly adds a bunch of threat, which could be very difficult for a player to manage. So yeah, that's pretty much how the Enchantress, that's like my summary of how she operates. A pretty straightforward scenario there with some, new and interesting mechanics. Okay, so what do I like about the scenario? Well, there's actually a lot of cool things about the scenario that I do like a lot. Okay, so the first thing is with the Enchantress here. So the way that she works is that it's a force response based on her attack activation. So I like stuff like that a lot, similar to Magneto, where after the Magneto villain attacks you, you have to place a magnet counter on the main scheme. So I like that whenever she schemes, you don't do anything, right? Whenever she's scheming, she does not have a force response that's tied on that. So there's ways for a player to actually flip down and then just allow her to scheme, and you can slow the rate of getting charmed, which is actually pretty cool, right? Because she's kind of like punching you, attacking you, and then charming you. But then if you flip down, sure, she's going to, progress on her schemes here, but she's not going to accelerate that charming on you, which is a pretty nice touch, and it gives some more breathing room for a player to like decide and strategize how to win a play, to flip down against her and stuff like that. So I really like that it's tied behind one activation, specifically the attack activation, and then not tied behind the scheme activation. Another really cool thing about scenario is that for expert mode, there's a big ramp, which you guys know me, I really like the big change in standard and expert mode because a lot of scenarios are pretty easy, and I want the standard scenarios to be easy for people that want to play standard and want that easier, challenge in Marvel Champions. But for players that want a more difficult challenge, I want there to be that, spike in difficulty for expert mode. So here you guys can see on expert mode she has steady and toughness, and steady works really well with the Enchantress because, like we said before, her force response here is tied behind her activation. So if you stun her on standard mode, then that's entirely blocked out. But if you're playing her on expert mode, she has steady on both stages, so you cannot just easily stun her one time. You have to put 2 stun status cards to fully block out the activation and stop that charm counter from adding the counters on your hypnotic gaze card or whatever, right? So I think that that's a really cool design. And she also has really cool one builds here as well. Loki also has the same thing, which I think is a really cool, nice touch for spiking difficulty for standard and for expert, right? So for standard, it says when reviewed in standard mode, you put the set aside feature of despair into play, then place an additional 3 per player threat on it, right? So basically what they want you to do is to have this, side scheme come into play after you flip the Enchantress, right? So if you playing her in standard mode and you flip from stage 1 and stage 2, then you have to get this side scheme put into play. But if you're playing on expert mode, you don't start the game with the side scheme, right? Because it's only in standard mode, so the side scheme's still not there. But when you flip her from stage 2 to stage 3, then once again, her one beauty is you get that feature of despair, and you put an additional 4th on it, and you get that side scheme to play. And yeah, I think that's a very cool mechanic there. I also really like this feature of despair side scheme. Where is it? Right here. So this card here, as a part of setup, you remove from the game. So this is not in the counter deck. But this side scheme here says Enchantress gains Stalwart and cannot take damage, which is a pretty cool way to to really ramp her up on the flip, right? She becomes more difficult because her stats, get better, right? 2 scheme, and then 1 attack to 2 attack, and then here she goes up to 3 scheme, right? But in addition to that, she also gains star, and she cannot take damage, so you have to just take the side scheme down before you defeat her. You can't just rush her down, in one really quick go. And here it says one review, place 1 charm counter on each enchantment card in play, where you get more, you have a chance of adding that to the main scheme, or you get more charm counters on your hypnotic gaze. So that's a really cool one reviewed effect here, which really encompasses everything that Enchantress really wants to do to the player. So yeah, that is a pretty cool mechanic there. So I also really like that with her. And then I also really like the force responses here, right, guys? I really like stuff that gives the player a lot of options of how they want to play the game, right? Because one player with this force action here, right, exhaust his card, draw a card, then play that card by paying its cost if you cannot take on damage. So if 2 different players are playing, the exact same game, we will choose different parts of the turn where we want to use this force action and trigger it. I think that is always fun. There's no like right answer for something like this where you don't know, the top card of your deck. But for other stuff here, there might be a more optimal play or like a less optimal play. I think it's fun presenting that decision-making opportunity to the players and having you decide when you want to do that. So yeah, I think I really like these force actions here. And the last thing that I really like with the Enchantress is, what do I really like? It is with her activation card. Oh, right here, the Spell Blast. Man, guys, this card is nasty. Okay, this is a very, very nasty card. It's one of the worst encounter cards, I think, that we've ever seen in Marvel Champions. It's pretty underrated here. So it's a Treachery. One reviewed, if your identity has a defined trait, then you choose one. And basically the options are either the Enchantress schemes, and if you're doing expert mode, she gets +1 scheme for that scheme activation, or you pick that she attacks you with +1 attack in expert mode, right? So that's pretty standard, and it's cool that you get to make the decision if you're doing standard or if you have the defined trait. I mean, you can choose if she schemes or attacks. Usually we'll want her to attack because the threat on the main schemes are, so low with that threat threshold. So yeah, choosing there I think is very fun. But it says if your identity has the enthrall trait, and like I was telling you guys, I got the enthrall trait every single game that I played in Enchantress. I was not able to defeat her without flipping that over. So you do both in any order. And I mean, any order is, it's all right because it's like, okay, like which boost will she get? Will she get like the lower boost first or the higher boost first? Do I know that? Have I looked through an encounter deck with like a blind for something like that, right? But if I haven't, you're just taking, a random, chance. You're just guessing with luck, right? And yeah, that's really bad. It's basically an encounter card where it shows scheme and attack you if you play the scenario long enough, right? So basically, if you deep enough in a scenario where she has enthralled you, then she's gonna scheme and attack, double activate with 1 card. So that's already pretty nasty. But there's another underrated effect with this card as well, which is that there's a way for her to scheme here while you're in hero form. Not every single scenario, but most scenarios in Marvel Champions do not have a way for that villain to actually scheme on you if you're in hero form. The only way for them to scheme is with like the advance from standard 1 or like dark designs from standard 3 or like, cruel intentions from standard 2, right? Getting that where the villain will scheme, that will happen, if you review that encounter card. But usually if you review like their activation card, it will say something like, for example, like for the Rage of Ultron, it will say like, if you're an alter ego and you review the card, Ultron schemes. If you review the card but you're in hero form, then Ultron attacks you, right? So basically whatever form you're in, that's what the activation of the villain will be, right? If you're an alter ego, they'll scheme. If you're in hero form, they'll attack you, right? So basically, if you're in hero form and there's no more advances in the encounter deck, you'll know for sure that the villain cannot scheme against you. But Enchantress is not like that. And if you guys saw my first playthrough with Enchantress with Thor, I lost because of getting this card here. I was in hero form, and she got the Spell Blast and schemed on me, and then that caused me to lose the game. So that's actually a really cool mechanic, and I really like that they're giving the Enchantress a way to scheme while you're in hero form. That's a very, underrated type of mechanic. Mr. Sinister also has that, but not a lot of villains have that. So I think it's cool that she has it, and I think it's thematic for her to have that as well. But in addition to that, it's a double activation if you are enthralled. So very, very tough card there. Yeah, very, very cool mechanic. I definitely like this card a lot, and it's pretty difficult for her as well. So yeah, a lot of cool things with the Enchantress. Yeah, so a lot of things I like. So I'm gonna go over some stuff that I don't like about the scenario, and there's not that many things. So the first thing is going to be the seduced here, right? And this is not the first time we've seen this card. We've seen this card with the Enchantress Modular set. We've seen it with Valkyrie's Nemesis set, which is also, that same thing as the Enchantress Modular set. But yeah, so it's an attachment here. When you reveal this card, you attach to your identity, and you cannot make basic attacks or play attack events. As an option, you can spend a energy and a mental resource to discard this card. This card is super duper nasty. It halts so many games because you basically can't finish the villain off. You can't attack or play your attack events unless you flip down to Alter Ego first. And it's very good for the Enchantress because she schemes with the highest scheme stat and has low threat thresholds. So if she gets this card on you, it could be game ending if you don't have a way to get rid of it, which is only by flipping down. And if you flip down and then she schemes out, then you lose the game, right? So it's the whole thing. So yeah, this could be pretty rough. I was never a big fan of this card. It really makes the player have to figure out a way to be able to access Alter Ego without letting the villain win, right? Or you're just relying on luck to not get this card out. So yeah. And another thing I don't like about this card is that it's not that thematic in my opinion. I like the thematicness of the Seduced, but if you have like a weapon upgrade, like let's say for example you're playing Cable and you have your plasma rifle, well, it's not a basic attack and it's not an attack event. So you can still use your gun and like shoot the Enchantress, but you can't make a basic attack or play attack event. So I don't understand why there's that loophole there. And I've definitely abused that loophole, so I'm not complaining. But I think even thematically, it's not like the best card. But yeah, seeing a reprint of this card is definitely not something that I'm a big fan of in this scenario. But I think overall, I mean, it's still a very cool scenario. The other thing that I'm not a big fan of is that I think there's a huge variance between the different hypnotic gazes here, right? So we have, the Defiant side right here, and you flip it over, then you have the Enthralled side, right? So some of the Enthralled cards are very disadvantageous for a player, and some aren't that disadvantageous. I don't like seeing that big of disparity between the same cards, right? Because you can just get really good luck and get a better one, or really bad luck and get a worse one, right? So what is the best one? The best one has got to be the ready one. Okay, this one. Oh my goodness, guys. Okay, so the Trance of Envy. Okay, you exhaust this card as a force action. You give the Enchantress a phase down boost card, and then you ready your identity. Okay, well, if you're, chump blocking and you have odds to defend for you, the boost card doesn't do anything, but you get an extra ready, and you can do that every single turn. That is so powerful for heroes that already have decks revolved around readies, and a lot of heroes want to do that, and they want to ready a lot. You're getting an extra ready on top of that. That is insane for just a phase down boost card, right? Like this could be a hero card where it's like, it's like a support or upgrade or something like that. And it's like, do you the villain a phase down boost card, ready your identity? Like people would pay like 1, 2, 3 costs to get the upgrade in play because that's a pretty good ready, right? So yeah, I mean, especially if but obviously if she's scheming, if the Enchantress is scheming, I mean, then you don't want to give her those boost cards, but you have to because it's a forced action, so you got to do every single turn. But this card is pretty powerful. And if you get one like the Enchantress Sloth, I think that this is the worst one here. You heal damage from the Enchantress. That's not that bad of an effect, but you can draw a card in this card. So you're basically just kind of, you're not even getting a +1 to your economy. You're just, cycling through, which can be really good, but I just don't really think that's as valuable as like, being able to remove 2 threat from a side scheme, or like, dealing 2 damage to a minion, or readying your identity, right? So yeah, I don't know. Or even, drawing a card and then you can play that card there by paying its cost. So it's basically drawing you a card, right? And if you cannot, you take a damage. But usually you want to do it in a time where you either want to take the damage or you want to play the card. And maybe I just got really good luck with the Trance Degree because whenever I triggered this, I usually got like 0 or 1 cost cards when I had like 1 resource left, to play or something like that. Or I got like a big card that I was able to play that I wanted to play whenever I triggered it. So yeah, personally, I think that there's a huge variance, and I'm not the biggest fan of having that variance for a scenario. And yeah, overall, I think that the only other downside for this scenario is that I also think that the Enchantress, I think this scenario can also be pretty swingy, right? So if you get very unlucky, like I said earlier, she can flip this Hypnotic Gaze on you, by turn 2. If she gets boost cards that add her charm counters, right? Like, let me see, there's boost effects like here, where you either choose to place a charm counter on your enchantment card or confuse your identity. And then there's ones where you just have to place 1 charm counter on the enchantment card in your play area. And obviously, if she gets like under fire, she'll get like 2 encounter cards, and those encounter cards may add, charm counters by themselves as well, right? So, if you get really unlucky, she can add a bunch of charm counters very quickly, and by turn 2, already get you enthralled. If you are very, very lucky, then you can go several turns where you're not getting those you're not getting charm counters, I mean, right? So I think that it could be swinging that way. And basically, I'm not the biggest fan of where like the player experience is like some people, if they get really lucky, they can play scenario and be like, okay, it's so easy. Like she didn't even charm me, and I was able to defeat her very quickly. I could just rush her down. Versus other people, even if they're rushing her down, they get like halted because she makes you enthralled, or she's giving that big side scheme where you can't or not the big side scheme, but she's giving you this attachment here where you can't play attack events, right? So like I'm not the biggest fan of having a swingier scenario, and she's definitely not the most swinging scenario in Marvel Champions, right? So like I would say like Nebula or like Collector 1 are more swinging scenarios than the Enchantress, but she's more swinging than I would like. It's just a minor gripe. I think she's still overall a good scenario, and I still really like the scenario. So definitely just a minor nitpick there. But yeah, that's my thoughts on what I like and don't like about the Enchantress scenario. And then as for her power ranking here, I think that she's actually a fairly difficult scenario. I'll rank her in the high B tier. In my personal experience playing Enchantress, I not find her on the difficulty of like an A tier villain like Ultron or Magneto, but I did think that she was, a lot more difficult than a lot of the B tier low villains, right? So I think she is a solid scenario in Marvel Champions and a great addition to the game overall. It's also very important to remember Enchantress' Force Interrupt for both her main scheme stages, where when a charm counter will be placed on the enchantment card in your play area, if you're enthralled, you place the threat on here instead. Late game, she can add so much threat so quickly with so many different sources in addition to scheming, because she's constantly adding those charm counters each time she attacks you, right? So instead, you put that as threat on here instead, and this can really ramp up very, very quickly. So yeah, that could get very dangerous. I think that also makes her more difficult, and I think that the players kind of want to play this scenario with a little bit more of a tempo because she's placing so many charm counters on there, and if you get really unlucky and she combines that with like a scheme and attack activation, like with the spell blast. There's two copies of this card in her encounter deck, by the way. But if you get this and you're already in thrall, right? Well, she's attacking you, so she's gonna get at least one threat on the main scheme by placing that charm counter, right? And then her boost card may be another boost effect that adds a charm counter, and then so that could be two threat. And then she could scheme here with +1 scheme as well on top of that. So like, I mean, she has 3 base scheme, so yeah, she can easily, pack on that threat to it. So I think that that's something to be worried about whenever you are facing the Enchantress here. And as for how much do I like the scenario, well, I think she's a very, very cool scenario. I like the theme of the scenario. I like the mechanics. I think she presents a lot of fun decision-making opportunities for the players, which I always like. So yeah, a very cool scenario, and I like that she, kind of stops rushing a little bit with her one beat effects, right? Whenever you flip her to get the Future of Despair into play, where she can't take damage. So overall, very cool scenario. Definitely one of the top scenarios for me in the game. And yeah, very, very fun and a fairly difficult scenario. So yeah, very good scenario here from the Enchantress. Okay, let's go and move on to the second scenario and the final scenario in the Trickster Takeover scenario pack, which is the Loki God of Lies. And we'll mainly be going over how single table works with Loki, just because we don't really have any other epic multiplayer scenarios in Marvel Champions to compare this to. So single table is going to be, 1 to 4 players here. And I think it's a pretty cool scenario. So basically how Loki God of Lies works is that there is the main body of Loki right here with the unique symbol, and it has a stage 1 and a stage 2. And then this is the main body. To win the game, you must defeat this Loki God of Lies, right? You defeat any other Loki, you do not win the game. This is the one that has to get defeated here, right? So if Loki God of Lies is defeated, all players in all groups win the game. If you are doing in multiple, groups, multiple pods, then it's 20 per player, right? So if you're doing like, one group with like 4 players, and then you have like another group with another 4, then that's going to be total 8 players. So it's going to be 20 times 8 there. And if you're doing like, 20, 30, 40 players, it's going to be, 40 times 20, which will get his hit points, probably into like the thousands or something like that, right? So he can get a bunch of hit points if you're doing the epic multiplayer version of the scenario. But for, true slow, it's just going to be 20 hit points. And if you're doing like 2 players, it's going to be 40 and so on, right? So he still scales very well for a single table type of scenario here. Okay, so we must defeat him to win a game, and there's a separate main scheme stage here with the A and B called the Worlds Collide. And basically, it's going to be 2 per group, right? So since we're usually going to be talking about the the single table here, it's just going to be 2 threat, right? So basically, it doesn't matter if you're 2 players, 3 players, or 4 players. If you're all in one group, it's still going to be 2 threat. And if you get 2 threat on this main scheme, then the players will lose the game. And one cool thing here is that basically the way this works is that, I got to go on the other main scheme. To go over that. So it's going to be the main scheme, for each group. So basically this main scheme, stage 1B here, has 2 force interrupts. And it says whenever this scheme would be completed, you remove all threat and you place 1 threat on the Worlds Collide main scheme instead. So this main scheme right here. Or the other force interrupt is whenever an identity would be defeated, you change identity's form to alter ego, set the hit point down to 1, and place 1 threat on Worlds Collide. So it's pretty cool because if an identity is defeated, they can still keep on playing the game now. You just add a threat on this big main scheme right there. And basically that's another way for Loki to win a game is by threading this out. So basically if you're doing like true solo and this hits 8, 2 times, then you add 2 threat, on that Worlds Collide main scheme and the players will lose the game. So yeah, that's kind of how the second body of Loki works. And I don't think it's that much more upkeep if you're doing in true solo or for a single table. It's not that bad at all. Okay, let's go over the avatars of Loki here. So there are 4 fake Lokis, and these are the avatar of Lokis. So you have Loki the Rascal, you have Loki the Miscreant, Loki the Knave, and Loki the Wretch here. And basically, if you flip it over, they're all going to be a Fading Figment, which all has the exact same effect for the one reviewed effects there, right? So they all have a 15 per player hit points, and they all have a different force response, which is actually pretty unique as well. Let's take a look at some of them. So Loki the Rascal here has 1 scheme, 1 attack. But for him, as a force response, after you resolve a boost card during his activation, if it's a treachery, you either deal it to yourself as a face encounter card or spend a resource of any type, so you get that option there. And if you're facing a Loki the Miscreant, after you resolve a treachery, you place a threat on the main scheme and a threat on a side scheme, right? So each one of them has that different force response, usually tied with treacheries. And then they all have the exact same force interrupt here, where whenever this villain would be defeated, you place 5 per player shadow counters here, and you flip the card over. And basically the way that the scenario works is when you flip it over, they flip over to the Fading Figment, and all the shadow counters that is on the Loki villain here before you flip them over to the Fading Figment, including that 5 per player that you just added, you move all of that and you put it as damage on that main body of Loki the God of Lies there, right? So each group, if you're doing the epic multiplayer, they're defeating their Loki the Rascal and they're putting shadow counters and dealing that as damage on Loki God of Lies. If you're just doing, in true solo, then hypothetically, if you defeat Loki the Rascal 1 time, you get, at least 5 shadow counters, so 5 damage on the Loki God of Lies. So if you defeat him, 4 times, then you get, 5 times 4, which is 20 damage, and then defeat Loki God of Lies, and then win the game that way, right? But there are many other ways to add shadow counters to Loki the Rascal, so or any one of these avatar Lokis. So don't worry about having to defeat him, these 15 per player hit points. Don't worry about having to do that actually 4 times. You can actually do it, usually 1 to 2 times, and even sometimes 1 time is enough to get enough counters, shadow counters to go ahead and burst down Loki God of Lies in one go, especially if you're doing this scenario in true solo, right? But I do think that it scales pretty nicely in true solo, in 2 players, 3 players, and so on. Okay, so that's basically how scenario works, and there's so many ways to get shadow counters, right? If you clear out side schemes, let's take a look at side schemes here, right? So like this one right here. Wait, no, not this one, another one. Let's look at this side scheme here. Lofty goes. When defeated, place 2 shadow counters on the avatar of Loki villain. That's going to be, the avatar that we talked about. So like the Loki the Rascal, or like whatever Loki avatar that you're facing, you get 2 shadow counters on there. They don't go on the main body yet, but once you knock this Loki out, then all those shadow counters go on the main body, including these 5 here. And also, there's a bunch of minions in this scenario as well. Let's take a look at like the Minotaur, for example. When defeated, place 2 shadow counters on the avatar of Loki villain, right? So that's the ways that you can get those shadow counters without having to actually defeat Loki himself. And then once you defeat him, that's when you move the shadow counters over to that main body. And yeah, it sounds kind of more complicated than what it actually is, but I promise you guys, it's a pretty straightforward and easy scenario as well. Not your standard type of like, burst the villain down like the Enchantress, but it's still kind of like that, right? It's kind of like getting shadow counters and then you burst down the avatar and you move the shadow counters over to the main body, and if it's enough counters, then the main body is defeated, right? But you usually want a hit point dollar to track the main body's hit points here as well. But yeah, okay, so that's how the scenario works. Now, what do I like about the scenario? Okay, I do like the new part where you have a main body of Loki, and I think that even in true solo, where it's probably like the least intended, way to play a scenario, right? You probably want at least, 2 players. I think that it actually works pretty well for single player, and it is the opposite of a slog, right? So I'm going to be comparing this Loki scenario to like the other Loki scenario at the end of this video. But yeah, so it's definitely not like a slog at all. The pacing is incredible. I really like the pacing of the Loki God of Lies scenario. I think it's one of the better paced scenarios in Marvel Champions. A lot of scenarios, especially if I'm playing with my wife, we feel like it drags on a little bit too much. So like, having to defeat one stage and a second stage. But Loki God of Lies, even in multiplayer, works really well. You can get out those shower counters, and he doesn't feel like a slog at all. He feels much more quickly than most scenarios, even more quickly than the Enchantress. So yeah, I really like that part about him. Obviously, if you're doing like epic multiplayer and you're playing like with a bunch of players, right, like 20 plus players, it's still gonna be a super long game, and it may feel like a slog just because he has so many hit points. But definitely, on average and compared to any other villain with like the same amount of player counts, then I think that he's a much more quick scenario. So I really like that about him, and I like having this extra body here. I also like that you can actually get defeated even if you're playing true solo and still continue, right? So that means that if something really bad happens and you like are predicting boost cards and then you get really lucky, you get knocked out by the villain's attack, you flip down to alter ego, but you don't lose the game. You just add one threat here to the worlds collide here. So I do like that. And another similar thing with the Enchantress that I really like with the Loki God of Lies is that he has that mechanic there. Where is that card? This thing. Oh man, this card is nasty, guys. Stories and Lies is a treachery right here, right? And you guys can see he has 3 copies of this. When review, you swap the avatar of Loki villain in play with the Ramses Loki villain. So it's just going to be entirely random, right? Then, depending on which Loki is in play, right? So it says if Loki the Knave or Loki the Miscreant, then you do this. If Loki the Rascal or Loki the Wrench is in play, then you do this, right? So if you swap the Lokis and you get Loki the Knave or Loki the Miscreant, then he'll scheme with +1 scheme in expert mode. Okay, that is just like the Enchantress, and I really like that because Loki's a big schemer, right? So basically, even if you are in hero form and there's no more advances in the encounter deck, and Loki gets this, he has a chance of scheming on you. And similar to the Enchantress, right? Enchantress has 2 main schemes, 6 threat and 9 threat. Well, Loki also just has 2 main schemes as well, right? Mischief and Mayhem, right? It's only one, but basically if it threats out twice, you lose the game, so it's essentially just 2. So basically, but they're both 8 per player threat. So Loki can easily add that 8 threat in one go if you get unlucky, and he can do it again. And if that happens, then you lose the game. So Loki, I actually think, has a pretty good way to, be kind of swingy and add a bunch of threat very quickly and ramp up on the players. So I think that it can actually be quite difficult there as well. So yeah, I should really like that he also has a way to do that. And just like with the Enchantress, I really like that spike in difficulty with standard to expert. Loki has that too. So it says here in standard mode for setup, you set the intense focus attachment aside, but in expert mode, you attach it to the avatar Loki villain play, right? So this is the intense focus right here, where the villain gains steady, right? So giving that steady for expert mode is really cool. If you're doing standard, Loki does not start with intense focus, so it doesn't have steady access to steady right away. And obviously, steady is a great way to block how Loki wants to activate. I am really liking the design where they give extra mode steady, but then you don't have steady for standard mode. I think that that's a really fun design here through the different attachments and stuff like that. And then another thing I really like about this scenario is this card right here, the Dark Arts. So we want to talk about the boost effect here, and Loki has other boost effects similar to this, where it says place 1 threat on the main scheme for each character you control. Okay, you guys know me, and just playing Marvel Champs, you guys all know that the strongest way to play is with a bunch of allies and like allies swarming, right? So this is a great way to deter that, especially with a scenario that adds a lot of threat, like Loki, for example, right? You place 1 threat on the main scheme for each character you control. Guys, that's wild, because if you have, 3 allies and you have that defense all set up, well, you have your identity and the 3 allies, so that's 4 characters that you control. You place 4 threat on the main scheme, that can just pop it. The main scheme's only at 8 per player, you know what I mean? So I think that that is a very cool boost effect. There's 2 copies of this card in the deck, and the one reviewed here is also very cool, right? Search the encounter discard power for a minion and reveal it. It has to be in the discard power, right? Loki is summoning with the Dark Arts one of those defeated minions that you have probably defeated. And if there are no minions, then you have to place 3 threat on the main scheme, right? So that is pretty cool, adding threat, or you get a defeated minion and you put it back into play. And the decisions, this would usually help the player to get this card as an encounter card, because you can get those minions that you can add shower counters back on again, right? So when defeated, you place 3 shower counters on the avatar Loki villain, and then you choose a group in your pod, and then you can do all this stuff, right? So you get bonuses for defeating these minions, which is pretty cool. So I definitely really like that you get, a positive effect for defeating these minions, and you get those shatter counters, which you want to do. And I think it's fun to have, big body minions here with, 2 scheme, 2 attack, and 7 hit points and stuff like that, right? So I really like the scenario. I like the big side schemes, 7 threat on this side scheme, 5 threat on this one. You get positive effects, you get shower counters whenever you defeat them, but also you have big minions as well, where you also get, positive effects like shower counters and synergy counters when you defeat them as well. We'll go into the synergy counters now, because that's actually a part that I am not the biggest fan of in this scenario. And it's not a big downside, right? I'm really nitpicking actually, because I don't mind it that much, but if I had to pick something I don't like about it, it would definitely be the synergy environments here, which is going to be, I think it's going to be at the bottom here. Okay, so basically, as the product setup, you put in these 4 environments into play: Domineering Force, Feign Retreat, Monster Resistance, and the Unified Front here. So they're all permanent environments. Okay, you guys know me, I don't like upkeep. I don't want to have 4 extra environments on top of having a main body of Loki and the main scheme. That being said, the upkeep on these is not bad at all, right? It's like really like not bad at all. It's just taking up a lot of space in your game area. It's kind of the worst part of that, right? So basically, the reason why it's not that bad is because these environments never do anything bad for you, right? They're only good for you. So even if you forget to do the upkeep, it's not like, oh, like I beat Loki, but I forgot to do the upkeep. Like, is this win still valid? Like, yes, it's still going to be valid because this stuff only helps you out. So if you really want to, you can play the scenario without any of these synergy environments and just still do fun, right? So that's one cool thing about this. It is required to do it to put these environments in play, but you can technically house rule and take the environments out, and nothing will change in the scenario. It'll just be more difficult for you. So if you're looking to make a scenario a little bit more difficult, just take out the environments, and it's also going to be less upkeep as well. But basically, the 4 environments are in play, and you can put synergy counters on there. And basically, whenever a friendly character would do a specific thing, like when a friendly character attacks, you can remove a counter from here. The attack deals 4 additional damage, right? So you get a massive boon to whatever you're doing, right? This one is when you take damage, remove a counter, prevent 4 of the damage. This one is remove a counter to get 4 more Thorn, which is crazy. This one you can remove a counter to generate 2 wall resources, right? So yeah, a bunch of cool effects there. Overall, I did not mind this that much. It just felt like it made the scenario a little bit too easy, right? And the ways to get synergy counters is by defeating those side schemes or minions, right? Like this side scheme right here. When you defeat it, you can also, in addition to getting the 3 shadow counters on Loki, you also can place 1 synergy counter on one of your synergy environments, like we talked about earlier with the Hawk minion. You place 3 shadow counters on Loki, and you also place 1 synergy counter on the Domineering Force environment, right? This one you place 1 on the Unified Front, and then I believe with this one you can choose, right? So you defeat the Man God, you can choose 1 synergy counter on one of their synergy environments, right? And one cool thing is if you're doing epic multiplayer, you can choose like a different environment from a different group and give them a synergy counter, right? So that's some more versatility that you can add in there for the epic multiplayer. But yeah, for true solo and for just one group, it definitely adds in a little bit too much help for the player, in my opinion. But it's still fun to really feel like you're swinging for a heavy hit, right? Getting +4, damage on attack with the Dominating Force, or getting +4 more threat removal, or getting more resources feels really good. So it still feels fun doing it. It just makes the scenario a little bit too easy, which is why it's one thing that I am not the biggest fan of for this scenario specifically. And then the only other thing that I don't really like about the Loki scenario is that, similar to Enchantress, I feel like that Loki can also be quite swingy as well. And I'll go into why I think that is. So basically, for the avatar of Loki's, they all have different effects, and some can be really, really nasty depending on what cards that you get, right? So like for Loki the Rascal here, right? After you resolve a boost card during his activation, if it's a treachery, you deal to yourself as an encounter card or spend 1 resource of any type. So if it's a nasty encounter card like a Shadow of the Past or an Advance, then you want to spend resources of any type. And if you get really unlucky and you get a treachery for his boost every single turn, where you're losing a bunch of resources or getting a bunch of nasty encounter cards, that could be really bad. But if you don't get any treacheries, right, like you keep on getting these minions and these side schemes or attachments as your boosts, then like the Loki's not really doing anything, right? So he could feel really, really nasty, right, with just making you lose resources every single turn, or essentially have no effect and just be scheming or time for 1, which is pretty weak, right? Each one of these Lokis has a type of high variance type of thing, right? Where it's like after you resolve a treachery, place one threat on the main scheme and one threat on a side scheme. Well, if you keep on getting minions and side schemes every single turn, then you don't have to do this effect. He essentially has no effect, right? So he really revolves around treacheries, but depending on which one that you get, and if you get treacheries as boosts or as encounter cards, it could neuter, a specific avatar Loki. So I think that a lot of players will have a very easy experience playing Loki. And I've seen the sentiments, online people like, oh, it's such an easy scenario. I've also had very easy games with Loki as well, because like if I'm getting this Loki and I don't get any treacheries like at all to review, like I only get side schemes and minions, well, it feels very easy, right? And then, like, for example, my first game with the scenario, I played with Thor, and I got the Loki the Wretch. And I believe the entire scenario, Loki never changed form. So he had the avatar Loki here, the Loki Wretch, the entire one. I think this is the easiest one of the Lokis as well. When Loki the Wretch activates against you, this card top on the counter deck. So he's, milling a card. And if it's a treachery, he gets +1 scheme, +1 attack for activation. Okay, so basically, if you're blocking an ally, it doesn't even matter that he gets +1 scheme, +1 attack. But even if you're not blocking, at worst, he's going to be a 2/2 villain right here, right? Which is, not that bad at all. And obviously, I should have mentioned that Loki does have a permanent attachment here with the intense focus and total focus, which gives him, more bonuses to his stats. So it's similar to Infinity Gauntlet where we have that +1 scheme, +1 attack, right? So, his stats are a little bit better than what I'm kind of like, showing here. But, even with that, right, it's not that bad of an effect. And he stayed on this form, I think, the entire game. And I kept on getting minions and side schemes as encounter cards, right? So whenever that happens, I kept defeating them as Thor, and I just built up, shadow counters on this avatar Loki right here. And then whenever you defeat him, you just burst down the God of Lies here in one go, right? So I think that depending on your player experience, depending on which avatar Loki you get, and depending on what type of encounter cards that you get or boost cards that you get, Loki can feel super duper easy. I think that that's not really representative of exactly how difficult this scenario can get if you have worse luck. So I think that's a little bit unfair, Loki, but I think that that's also tied into the design of the scenario, right? So I'm not a fan of it being a little bit more swingy, where it can be very, very easy versus actually being, a decent challenge, right? And I think that if you can actually get Loki here to under 10 hit points without defeating him, he'll flip over to stage 2, where he'll bring in this one viewed effect here, and he'll also bring in the total focus, which will bring in the dark scepter as well, which is this attachment right here, where Loki gains stalwart, treacheries can't be canceled, and then it has a hero response here as well, right? So if you actually are playing Loki and you have bad luck, I think that he can be a much more difficult challenge than if you're just having the best luck and just going through it, right? So I'm not the biggest fan of that, and that's gonna tie into how difficult I think this scenario is. I think that Loki is a B tier level scenario. And the way that I'm rating this scenario in terms of its difficulty is going to be on expert mode, right? Because, for standard mode, he's going to be a lot easier. But if you're playing standard, you probably don't want that much of a challenge anyways, right? Loki on standard mode, he doesn't start with steady, right? You only get this if you're doing... you only start with this if you're doing expert mode. If you're doing standard, he doesn't start with this. So similar to Enchantress, I don't think Loki is on that, A tier level of villains like, Magneto, Thanos, Ocean. But I actually think that he's also higher up in the B tier. I think that Enchantress is more difficult than Loki, but I think that Loki is more difficult than like scenarios like Claw or Mutation Formula. And honestly, I don't see anyone complain about Mutation Formula or Claw as being like too easy of, a scenario. A lot of new players actually, get a good challenge from Claw and from Mutation Formula, especially on expert mode. I think that Loki on expert mode is more difficult than those scenarios because he has steady, on both stages here. And having that steady, I think makes him more difficult just because he can't get stun locked or confused locked. And his threat thresholds, with his main scheme, he can pop that. He's a lot of ways to scheme. And like we talked before, he can scheme on you even if you're in hero form, which I think always adds some difficulty. So overall, I think that Loki's actually a pretty underrated scenario here. I think that he is more difficult than people give him credit for. And as for how much I like this scenario, I like Loki God of Lies a lot. I think that he's very, very fun. Even in True Soul, I think that the scenario is very well designed. I think that it's very well paced. I think that it's not a slog of a game if you're playing an equivalent player count, to whatever other scenario that you want to compare it to, right? So if you're comparing him to like, I don't know, Magneto with like 3 players or Loki God of Lies with 3 players, this feels much more smooth, much more, friendly paced, and a little bit of a quicker game as well. And finally, of course, I know everyone wants to hear, how does Loki God of Lies compare to the Loki scenario from the Mad Titan Shadow. That Capstone villain with the Infinity Golem as a required module set for that scenario. I like Loki God of Lies a lot more. I think he's a lot more fun. The Loki from Mad Titan Shadow is a huge slog. That's one of my most detested scenarios in Marvel Champs. I'm not the biggest fan of that one because it feels super duper long, especially if you're doing it on expert mode, where you have to do 3 stages, brings hit points down zero, 3 times, and it's 20 per player. I mean, that's the most hit points of like any scenario, I believe, right? So that just feels very, very long. The higher the player count, the more hit points. He's not super difficult, but he has so many ways to force you to flip down to Alter Ego in order to defeat him. That Loki scenario from the Mad Titan Shadow does so many things to try to slow down the player's tempo. Even if you like have the kill, he might like discard your upgrades or supports, with the Reality Stone, with the Infinity Gauntlet. If you play with his recommended sets, he has so many ways to, he can even seduce you, right, with that Enchantress Module set, which is recommended for that scenario, where you have to flip down to Alter Ego. He has stuff to make you frozen, like with the Frost Shines Module set where you can't ready. Just a lot of nasty stuff to slow the player down. And Loki God of Lies does not have that. He can still be difficult without being in the way of slowing the player down, and his hit points are much more even and fairly placed. Just having that one main body where you can defeat it with enough shower counters. So yeah, I like the scenario a lot more than Mad Titan's scenario. I think it's a lot more fun. I also think that this scenario is also very thematic, and I like Loki without the Infinite Gauntlet here as well. In terms of difficulty, I mean, it's not even close. The Loki from Mad Titan Shadow is a lot more difficult. I would consider that an A tier level villain versus Loki God of Lies being a B tier level, right? So it's a whole tier in between them. I don't think it's even comparable in terms of the difficulty for the two scenarios, just because that one has so many more oppressive things going on. And this one, it can really spiral and be swingy, but if you get lucky, it can feel very, very easy. All right, and this is the Trickster Magic modular set that came from Trickster Takeover. So this mod set has 11 cards in it, but it's almost kind of like just having 7 cards because there's 7 encounter cards, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, the minions here, and then 5, 6, 7. These are 7 cards you shuffle into your counter deck. And these cards right here, these 4 are also a part of the Trickster Magic, but they get set aside. And basically, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty unique and fun modular set, I think, for sure. Absorb Man, so each one of these minions here, whenever they get defeated, you put the set aside Absorb Man, that corresponding ally, into play under your control. So Absorb Man, he's 7 hit points, pretty strong with Brute, Elite, Enthralled, and Guard. And he also gets bonus attack equal to the highest printed cost of the card that you control. So 2 scheme, 1 plus whatever attack, right? But when you defeat him, you get the Absorb Man ally here, which is also very powerful. 3 cost ally, 1 thwart, 1 attack, 3 hit points. Whenever he attacks or thwarts, exhausts upgrade support control, he gets plus X to that power for his use, where X is equal to the card's printed cost up to a max of plus 3, right? So he can thwart or attack for 4. Very, very powerful to get his ally in play. Whenever they're defeated, they go into the victory display because they have that victory keyword, right? So you can't just refund the ally over and over again with like a make the call or something like that. But basically, each one of these allies has a corresponding effect tied into their minion version of the card. And I think that if it was just this here, the monster would actually be pretty difficult. But getting the ally actually makes it a pretty balanced monster in terms of difficulty. I'll rank it like, average, like a 5 out of 10 or something like that in terms of the difficulty, because having these allies help you out is very, very beneficial to the player. If you didn't have this, it would definitely be way up there in terms of difficulty to have, 4 big minions in addition to having this one right here. This side scheme here is pretty rough. So a side scheme by itself is not terrible, right? The villain gains stalwart. This does kind of block out a lot of like stun and confused strategies if the villain gains stalwart. So that could mess you up if the villain has steady and you place like 1 confused or something like that, and they get this card. But the worst thing is the boost effect here, which I actually really like. If this activation is an attack against overkill. Okay, that's kind of random, but that's pretty cool. And I like, I always like to have overkill in boost effects because then it can come out like a surprise. And that could really just end the game if you get really lucky, right? So if you have very bad luck and you're like chump block with ally and you don't have like 3 hit points left and the villain hits hard, well, they could kill you in that 1 hit by giving overkill to that attack, right? So I really like that, and that makes this Mars set more difficult. This is also a pretty nasty side scheme here as well. So in expert mode, it has a hinder 1 per player, so at least 3 threat here in expert mode. And the allies cannot thwart the scheme or defend against the villain's attacks. So you want to hope that you have either a thwart event or your hero can thwart it out, or like a red or something like that, so you can thwart this out, because it also has a hazard icon. So you'll be getting extra encounter cards. and you can't have your allies block villain's attack, right? So pretty cool, the max stats here with the Puppet Master. And then this card right here, I mean, it's not that bad at all. Basically, you attach the ally you control. This card here makes the Mars a little bit more easy because it's a pretty easy encounter card to get. Attached to an ally you control, otherwise it will gain Surge. Attached ally cannot attack the villain or defend against the villain's attacks, but the attached ally can still thwart, right? So as an alternate action, you can exhaust attached ally, spend a mental, and discard this card. You don't even have to do that. You just have the ally keep thwarting until they get knocked out with constant damage. When they get defeated, then this card get this card, right? So it's not that bad of a card. I get the max of it. And I think that is pretty thematic and fun, but it makes the difficulty of the Mars set, more balanced. So yeah, overall, it's a pretty fun Mars set. In terms of fun, I rank it very high, probably like 10 out of 10. I think it's a very, very fun Mars. I like having, big minions, you defeat them, and then they become an ally, and then they help you out. I like the overkill shenanigans here. But difficulty, it's not that difficult of a Mars set. Because like we talked about before, this card is super easy to deal with, and these minions, or these allies, I mean, once they become your allies, are very, very powerful and really helps the players out. So yeah, that is my thoughts on the Trickster Magic Modular set. Those are my thoughts on the two scenarios from the Trickster Takeover scenario pack. Let me know what you guys think. Have you guys also been enjoying the scenario pack? Let me know if you agree with my assessments on them, and let me know down in the comments what you guys think if you disagree. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys all in the next one.